Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Krisha Mayer-Vignaraja, and I am the President and CEO of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, or LIRS. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, LIRS is the largest faith-based national nonprofit dedicated exclusively to serving immigrants and refugees. We're here today because we wanted to provide a briefing on the current situation for those fleeing the violence in Ukraine, as well as to describe how communities can step up to support our new Ukrainian refugees. So one quick housekeeping note, we've set aside time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen to enter those. And we're really going to try to get to as many of the questions as we can. So since Russia's invasion, more than 5.6 million have fled Ukraine as refugees, and another 7.7 million are internally displaced. The situation on the ground is dire. Bombings continue, and civilians have been left without food or water. I think we have all seen the horrific scenes of hospitals, schools, even maternity wards being bombed, and unfortunately and tragically, there's no end in sight. Fortunately, on March 25th, President Biden announced that the US plans to welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians and others seeking safety from Russian aggression. More than 20,000 Ukrainians have already arrived through our southern border, and thousands more will enter through the newly announced Uniting for Ukraine program. So as you'll hear more about today from my amazing colleagues at LIRS, our network has already welcomed hundreds of Ukrainians in need of immediate assistance. And we anticipate that those needs will only grow as Ukrainians seeking safety begin to settle into their new communities. So what are we seeing today? Many families are arriving with nothing but the clothes on their backs and need help with everything from food and housing to navigating complicated social service systems and getting their children enrolled in school. So this work is just beginning. And thankfully, we have been overwhelmed in the best sort of way by the compassionate response of the American people to the needs of our neighbors. You only need to walk around, the block to see a Ukrainian flag flying from a building or in a window. And really, it is your outpouring of support that has been a stunning and inspiring example of what is possible when people across the world open up their hearts to welcome. We know many of you are eager to learn what more you can do. And so that's why we're hosting this, because we want to share with you what we know and provide clear, concrete steps to take toward this work of welcome. But we also acknowledge that some of the details of the government's official plan are still being fleshed out. So I'll just end by saying we must meet this moment. Right now, not only do we have the opportunity to help Ukrainians, but to rebuild our refugee and immigration systems. We believe that now is the time to create a system that is nimble and can withstand crises while recognizing the dignity of all people and fulfilling our moral and legal obligations to those fleeing persecution. And this is where your support is essential. And I look forward to continuing this work of welcome with you. But don't just listen to me. Now I invite you to hear directly from a family resettled by the LIRS network and to get a sneak preview of our next speaker, Olga.
Было особенно страшно, когда они жили в Ирпени, город такой, что они в подвале сидели с детками. У меня такое, я так переживала, он и муж, и все. Я ночью лежала и плакала. Кого мы ждем? Самых дорогих. Без слез не могу. Нам, благодаря сотрудникам АСНТРИ, и Оле, и любые вопросы мы обращались, никогда не было отказа.
They are regular refugees. They were filed through the Lautenberg program. They got approval back in 2021. All the time on the phone with their mother who invited them here because they had to wait that long for the flights. I see there is email coming, flight is scheduled. There was so much joy. I felt like it's my sisters coming here.
верится, что мы уже тут на месте.
Это как вот, когда война началась, первый день, мы вообще типа, да, быть такого не может. Ну как это война
Даже
началась?
понять, мы думали, это за 3 дня как-то закончится и все. Ну, мы бы, конечно, первое мечтали, чтобы дети наши больше не столкнулись с войной, потому что вот они такие маленькие и уже ощутили, что такое война, услышали. А тут хотелось бы, чтобы наши дети получили хорошее образование, создали хорошие крепкие семьи и были счастливыми гражданами Америки.
Чтобы они были свободными. Вот. Да.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Megan Bracey, and I serve as our Director for Resettlement and Integration Services here at LIRS. And I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, who's now famous from that video, Olga, who's here with us today from Essentia Care Alliance, located in Western Massachusetts. And she has been busy, very busy up there serving lots of Ukrainians who've recently arrived, both like the family you just saw and also those who've crossed the US southern border via Mexico. And so Olga, I'm happy to have you here and just want to ask you a few questions about your experience so far and just what the last several months have been like on the ground in Massachusetts. You know, what challenges are people facing? What are you hearing in terms of needs? We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Olga, and as you heard already, my name is Olga. I came from Ukraine originally back in 2009. I was born in a very beautiful city. The name of the city, Odessa, which is located on the Black Sea. Back in 2009, I came to America with my mom, having refugee status through the Lautenberg program. I'm already U.S. citizen, and now I work with Ukrainians and with Afghan people with a lot of different nationalities. So regarding what we had for the last month, since the war started, then the same day, numerous phone calls from the relatives, relatives abroad, from the relatives living here in America, especially those that filed documents. Everybody was calling and sending the text messages asking how can they speed up the process of the Lautenberg program, what kind of programs they can use in order for their relatives to bring here because they can support them financially. I would get the phone calls even like at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock, because it's a different time over there. People were like a lot of concerns, a lot of worries, like how to bring or how to help. And the first week, it was like really hard from the people, like, trying to help as much as they can. And then the border through the Mexico opened, and people started coming to United States, crossing the Mexican border. For now, today I counted is 194 people that came through my office. Those are the Ukrainians that came through the Mexican border. We try to help them, even though we are limited with the resources as much as we can help, but we try to help everybody. We give gift cards, donations from the food bank. Some agencies are also giving some donations like toiletries. We also try to provide it to the people. Then we are filing them through the LIRS, the grants that also the amount of money that can be held them once. And like, thanks a lot for this kind of program. We also try to search for the legal services in order to help them to apply for the work authorization card, because this is the first issue that is raised. They all need to apply for the work authorization card in order to start working legally here. We just like answer lots of text messages and phone calls that are still going and still receiving, because they're here right now and they need, like, these simple questions. Where is the best meat to buy? What store do I go? It's just like a lot of different questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so grateful that you're there on the ground, able to answer those questions for people. And just for our audience, just for your sake, just so you understand some of the ways in which Ukrainians are able to come to the United States, there are a couple different pathways. So, probably the most prominent and common is the one that Olga herself came through with the Lautenberg Amendment. So the Lautenberg Amendment facilitates resettlement of persecuted religious minorities, and some from Ukraine, but other countries as well. And this is a relatively small resettlement program, and there are pretty stringent eligibility criteria, and you have to have family in the US who can file for you under this program. But those who come are admitted as refugees, and then we're able to serve them through the LARS network of providers. And so that is a wonderful thing. And then additionally, as Krish mentioned at the beginning of the call, since the beginning of the war, we have seen over 20,000 Ukrainians take the trip to Mexico and cross over the US southern border into our country. They're primarily entering under a status called humanitarian parole, which is a very limited temporary status. It's not really a status, it's just allows for a temporary stay in the US with little to no benefits or support from the US government. And hence what Olga's talking about, providing them, just gift cards and support that we can get from the community. And then lastly, now we anticipate additional Ukrainians will arrive through the US government's program Uniting for Ukraine, which will welcome Ukrainians to the US again on a temporary basis for a period of 2 years via private sponsorship. And we'll talk a little more in detail about what that's going to look like. But back over to you, Olga, as we sort of, now prepare for additional people to be arriving in the months ahead, what do you foresee will be some of the biggest needs on the ground? What kind of support will people need?
Well, first, I would say that the largest challenge for the Ukrainian humanitarian people that parolee that will come with the parolee status, there will be legal documentations. Those that even will come through the United Ukraine, right? The first step that they will have to do to apply for the work authorization cards. And that's the first thing that they will have to get the help. Also financial resources, that's also a huge, even though there is a lot of Ukrainian churches in my area that already sponsering and helping, but still financial is always a problem. The other long-term support, I would say mental health challenges, because as the war is going on and those people that will be coming through the United Ukraine program, that means those people stayed longer there and they will need a lot of mental support, because what they've seen and what they've heard, it's the life after that is not going to be easy for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And are there things that, people maybe tuning in right now, listening to this webinar can do to help, especially, of course, at your agency in Western Massachusetts, but also in other places? Can they volunteer and support in that way?
Of course, we do accept as many volunteers as come to our offices. There is also, I know, donations. Even if you see just in the store the person that you feel like it is Ukrainian, just come and talk to them and say they're welcome here in Ukraine, that they're in a safe place. That is we have a peaceful sky, and any way of support, just coming and talking to the person, that's already a huge help. Also donation centers, I know there was created a websites where you can donate, even if you don't know how to use the computer, and if you know the Ukrainian church around you, come to that church and ask how can they help with the newly arrived people. As I said, just simply talking and giving a hug, it's already a huge help, support.
Absolutely. That is so great. Thanks so much, Olga. Go ahead.
I'm actually hosting a girl right now. She came to America, and I was on a vacation 2 weeks ago, and she just like a couple days ago, she came from Ukraine. She was staying in Kyiv up to the last days, and when we were on the vacation, somebody would come. They would hear us talking in Ukrainian language, and they would ask, "Where are you from?" And we would say, "From like we are originally from Ukraine." And this girl, she just a couple days ago flew. People would just come and give her a hug. She had tears in her eyes because
Oh,
it's like incredibly how much support you can get just like hugging a person that struggle with such a hard time. Just a small example.
yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really beautiful. Well, we'll circle back more. I'm sure there'll be questions, but I think right now we'll turn it over to Chelsea, who's going to talk a little bit more about how you can help.
Yes, thank you, Megan and Olga. Everyone, my name is Chelsea Johnson, and I serve as network organizer at LIRS. It's true for me as a staff member, and I'm sure for so many of you joining us today, that as we see these headlines and hear these stories of what's happening, we feel called to respond, called to take action and show compassion. At LIRS, we often hear from kind and generous people the question, how can we help? It can be hard to know where to start when we see so many people impacted, when we see such incredible need. So how do we start? How do we take a first step? At LIRS, we have developed the ADAPT model. ADAPT stands for act, donate, advocate, pray, and teach. What the LIRS ADAPT model offers is tangible ways that you today can immediately show support and solidarity with our newest neighbors and begin to prepare our communities to welcome long-term. I'm going to share with you today a few ways that you can begin to adapt with LIRS. A, act. As we heard from Olga, the LIRS network of affiliates and partners have already begun to fill in the gaps and meet the needs for the most vulnerable of our new neighbors from Ukraine. If you feel called to support offices like Olga's, I encourage you to fill out the LIRS volunteer interest form. By filling out this form, you will receive updates on volunteer opportunities available across the US, and in particular in locations where our affiliate offices need support. So A, act, you can volunteer. D, donate. You can help LIRS prepare to welcome our Ukrainian friends and family by donating to the Neighbors in Need Ukraine Fund. Your gift will help provide essential and immediate support to families like in the video we saw earlier, such as emergency housing expenses and medical costs. Your generosity can transform how our most vulnerable Ukrainian neighbors are welcomed here. You can make a gift at lirs.org/Ukraine Fund. So we've got act, donate, advocate. We are so grateful to the supporters and advocates who have already sent nearly 1,000 messages to the administration. That advocacy has helped achieve wins like temporary protected status and expedited family reunification. We are now encouraging you to raise your voices and urge Congress to approve additional money for Ukraine in the next week. The bill includes funds that would support Ukrainians coming to the US with critical services like healthcare, job training, and English language classes. You can take action through the action alert that will be shared in the chat and follow-up email. And please be sure to share this advocacy opportunity with others. Our next focus in the ADAPT model is prayer. We invite you to pray and advocate for Ukrainians seeking safety through the LIRS Stand Up, Speak Up program. This program is centered on the idea that rather than be divided by our differences, such as faith backgrounds, ethnicities, countries of origin, that we can be united by our shared humanity, that we can stand up for our values and speak out alongside our newest neighbors. we invite you to host an interfaith prayer vigil and take collective advocacy action with your community, whether that be a congregation, interfaith group, or university. You can help prepare our communities at all levels to welcome. You can find tools for hosting your own Stand Up, Speak Up event at lirs.org/speakup. These tools include a community mobilization guide, a toolkit specific to responding to and praying for the crisis in Ukraine, and customizable templates for hosting your own event. If you're unable to host your own, we invite you to join the LIRS Stand Up, Speak Up Vigil, which will be held in Baltimore on June 2nd and live streamed for audiences around the country. We'll also be hosting a national Stand Up, Speak Up call-in day on June 22nd to advocate for our newest neighbors in celebration of World Refugee Day. And you'll receive more information about that by downloading the Stand Up, Speak Up kit. Finally, we find ourselves at the letter T in ADAPT. T stands for teach, that we might stay vigilant in teaching ourselves about the challenges that lie ahead for our Ukrainian neighbors, whether that's navigating the complicated humanitarian parole and US immigration legal system, learning more about the practical day-to-day challenges of building a new life here in the US, or teaching ourselves more about the history of conflict in Ukraine and the beautiful country and culture they leave behind. You can find educational resources across these topics in the LIRS Stand Up, Speak Up kit, as well as in the Ukraine Action Hub. I also want to congratulate you because by being here today at this webinar, you are already learning. You are teaching yourself and opening yourself up to teach others about the realities Ukrainians and others seeking safety here are facing. So good job. You've already taken your first ADAPT step. And I look forward to the ways you will act, donate, advocate, pray, and continue teaching in solidarity with Ukraine. I will now pass it back to Megan to share more about the ways LIRS programming is providing critical support. Megan?
Great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. So through our programs, there are lots of different ways that LIRS is supporting Ukrainians and all refugees and immigrants that we work with. President Biden recently announced the Uniting for Ukraine program, which provides a pathway, as I mentioned before, for Ukrainian citizens and their families who are outside of the United States to come here and stay temporarily for a 2-year period under parole. Ukrainians who participate in Uniting for Ukraine must have a supporter or a sponsor in the United States who agrees to provide them with financial support for the duration of their time here in the country. While LIRS is not playing an active role in the matchmaking process for private sponsorship, we are still very much involved in supporting Ukrainian refugees and others. So one way in which we do this is through our Neighbors in Need Fund. At the beginning of April, we established this fund to provide financial assistance to Ukrainians who had crossed the US southern border and were showing up at our affiliated resettlement partners across the country. Because they were coming with the paroled status, they're not eligible for almost all of the services that we are providing for refugees here, which is really challenging at the local level because, of course, everyone has a big heart, everybody wants to help out. But through these funds, we're able to provide these clients with needed items, with services, and with support. For example, we are seeing cases like Tatiana, who had to flee Ukraine due to the war. Her home was destroyed. It was located in the midst of an active war zone. And now she ended up having nowhere to go. Tatiana's relatives in the US agreed to help her. And now, thank God, she is safe here. But she has no savings and she needs at least some essential items, hygiene items, transportation, clothing, and she's ready to work anywhere. Tatiana expressed that today she's starting her life from the very beginning and she appreciates any financial help LIRS is able to offer. Additionally, LARS is working to establish more what we call welcome centers. Welcome centers are centers that provide support and programming for any immigrant, regardless of status. At LARS, we believe that anyone who needs our support, refugee, immigrant, humanitarian parolee, should be able to walk in those doors and receive it. Through our Welcome Center in Portland, Oregon, we've seen a lot of different Ukrainian populations popping up there, and we are able to provide these families with the much needed support, similar to what Olga was talking about. And that certainly is gaining that work authorization so they can legally work here in the United States, place to live, key essential part of setting up a new life, mentorship and community support from volunteers and co-sponsors, access to food, enrolling kids in school, and making sure it's all done with a trauma-informed care approach. Additionally, LARS also provides mental health services. We do this in a culturally and linguistically informed way, and we know they're very much needed for those who are escaping the horrors of this war. And lastly, we operate a new and innovative program called New American Cities, which provides Ukrainians and all immigrants opportunities to thrive in their new home by providing pathways to higher paying and higher quality jobs. So by providing support to LARS, you are supporting our newest Ukrainian neighbors and all of the refugees and immigrants that we serve. And we're very grateful for that. And I'll pass it back over to Krish.
Okay. Thank you, Megan. Okay, so this leads to the Q&A session, and really grateful for the active chat box of people putting in questions. So just a reminder, you can put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. So I'll start with asking a question that's been asked in a few different ways, and I'll direct this to Megan. So one question that we're getting is, I have space in my home. How can I host a Ukrainian refugee or family? And then a second kind of broad set of questions we're seeing is, how can I sponsor a family?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. And that is essentially what Uniting for Ukraine is designed to do. So you can go, and I think we may have put it in the chat, or we will, to the USCIS website, where the form is there. You can fill it out, and you can start that process. Primarily all of the vetting and organizing is done on the USCIS side in partnership with welcome.us, and they will be able to support you through that process. I think there's this bit of an experiment, to be honest. The US hasn't done a lot with private sponsorship. There are other models in Canada that we've seen, but here we are, we're going to be exploring this. And so we're also advocating and looking for ways in which resettlement agencies can be a supporter to make sure that this is a success.
Okay, perfect. This next question I'll ask to Olga. Do many of the people coming from Ukraine speak English? And there is a related question, do they speak Russian?
Yes, both questions, yes. Well, a lot, I would say 70%, 60 to 70% people do understand English. Some of them speak perfect English, better than mine. Some of them different levels, but a lot of people, they can read English, they understand the English. Even if they don't understand, they usually know how to use the Google Translate. And the second question, if they speak Russian, some depends what area you're coming from. Everybody understands Russian, but mostly talk in Ukrainian. So if you talk to me in Russian, I will understand you. We do understand both languages.
Okay, wonderful. And then there's a couple questions that have been asked about, what benefits do the Ukrainians receive? Obviously, the Afghans who came as humanitarian parolees did get some benefits, whether that was healthcare, access to SNAP. So will Ukrainians who arrive and get these benefits? And unfortunately, the answer is no. That is because they are coming through the humanitarian parole program. And while we did see Afghans granted this, it was because, us, other groups, veterans groups, a number of kind of a coalition entities advocated that Afghans be admitted into the country quickly, and hence why humanitarian parole was used, but also that they be provided the benefits that a refugee typically would be. We've likewise been advocating that Ukrainian refugees should have access to the same assistance and services that other refugees receive, but at this point, the administration hasn't offered that, unfortunately. So Megan, obviously would love if you could chime in with any additional insights that you want to share. But I also want to direct one question to you. Having assisted, the question is, having assisted several Afghan families in the DC area, apparently LIRS got them involved, so that's wonderful to hear. We fear the system is already overwhelmed and that Afghans might end up on the streets in the not too distant future. Is our concern valid? We must help Ukrainians, but of course we don't want to forget the Afghans in need. So Megan, could you speak to that? How do we balance these concerns?
Absolutely. And I appreciate your concern. We certainly don't want to ever, leave somebody in a situation where they don't have support. I think it's a but, or it's a, we can do both. I believe we can do both. When we look at what, we've done just over the last 6 months, we're settling, over 70,000 Afghans. That was it has been a very challenging resettlement in a very quick amount of time, with a resettlement infrastructure that was, really beaten down and had to rebuild simultaneously. I think, as we look to support Ukrainians, we have to balance both, as Krish said. I think our advocacy around getting benefits and support for Ukrainians is key and crucial, so that they themselves, as they arrive here, have supports to keep them, afloat. And then absolutely, in addition to Ukrainians and Afghans, we're still resettling Congolese, we're resettling Syrians, we're resettling people from Central America. It's a part of what we do, it's who we are. And so, I think it's just a continuous work to find new partners, find housing options, find, community members who want to volunteer and who want to help out. And I truly believe that that we have that capacity. We just need to continue to work at it, continue to build it, and continue to support those who are already here and those who will be coming.
Great, okay. And then another set of questions, imagine Megan can answer. Obviously, Olga, please chime in if you'd like. So there was a request for clarification. If Uniting for Ukraine is based on private sponsorship, what is the role of LIRS in this process? Will the refugees be allowed to hold employment under the Uniting for Ukraine program? And how long are sponsors expected to completely support those that move into their home? How many refugees can someone sponsor?
Very good questions. I can start off, Olga, and please feel free to jump in. So LIRS's role is really, I would say, kind of on the exterior of the Uniting for Ukraine program. That program is designed to basically depend fully on private sponsors, private citizens, to support those who come under that program. But LIRS knows from our 80+ years of experience that to resettle families, there's a lot of different, expertise and work that goes into that. Olga can talk about it firsthand on the ground. And so we see ourselves as being there to support people through our Neighbors in Need Fund, through our New American Cities program, through our Welcome Center models, the different programs we've developed that benefit those who may come in under this program. And they will be work authorized. The process, though, will require that once here, they apply for the employment authorization document, the EAD. And right now, without any sort of expediting, that can take, anywhere from 6 months on in order to receive that. So that is a challenge. I think that we will also be advocating for quicker expedited employment authorizations so that people can work. And obviously that would help to financially support themselves. And then lastly, sorry, Krish, I think I lost the last part of your question.
And I have lost it as
So
well.
sorry. I think
No. I know I threw a few at you. I think the final question was just how long are sponsors expected to support?
Yes, that's right. So it is a 2-year commitment that the program is working with. And so, obviously the hope is that people will start working, but generally people under this status are not eligible for the majority of public benefits. There are some exceptions, and some states have, increased access, but that does, translate to medical coverage, things like that, where, those are some expenses that one would have to take into account when signing up to do this program.
And I just want to underscore what Megan said, because certainly, if government support through the refugee resettlement infrastructure does not exist, and it's taking 6 months or longer for these parolees to get their employment authorization documents, it's a really dire situation, because it means basically those who have access to a sponsor who can, make that kind of commitment have a real opportunity to resettle. But otherwise, I think it is going to be a severely strained system. So we're going to continue our advocacy efforts, because we do believe that to do right by these refugees, they should have the support that other refugees have. We were heartened last week to see that the president had put in language for some assistance that would be directed domestically. Obviously, First Lady Biden is traveling to the region, but I think it is important to understand that, you look at countries in Europe or Canada, our northern neighbors, and they have a more robust system that provides some of the support that we are currently not offering. So when Chelsea described, yes, there are direct services and needs that we hope those on the call, could work with us to meet. I also think that it's important for our political leaders to hear that there is, a responsibility, we believe, the government shoulders. And just as we are able to provide Ukrainian soldiers with howitzers, we should be providing Ukrainian refugees who come to our shores with humanitarian aid. So I think the next set of questions I'll ask of Olga. Are the refugees able to obtain driver's licenses? And then another question, tell us more about Accenture Care Alliance.
Driver's licenses, it all depends from the state to state. Also, in our state in Massachusetts, you cannot get the license until you get the work authorization cards. I've heard that some of other states, they did provide the license, but also in some of the states, you can drive in the international license up to a year. Some states, 3 months, some states 1 month. Massachusetts, you can drive up to a year having the license from Ukraine. Regarding Accenture Care Alliance, we are a refugee resettlement agency. We receive refugees from all different countries like Afghanistan, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Somalia, Jordan, from different parts of the world, helping people to settle down in America.
Wonderful. Thank you, Olga. So the next 2 questions I'll ask of Megan, and I'll try to only throw 2 at you at a time. So Megan, is the process of taking the Ukrainian parolees, has that officially started in the southern border? And I think maybe if you could also speak to how the announcement on Uniting for Ukraine affects those who were coming through the southern border. Obviously, I think that's an important dynamic to highlight if you could. And then it also, another question, it looks like children under 18 must be traveling with a parent or guardian to use the Uniting for Ukraine program. Is there a separate plan for children?
Great question. So yes, so in part, the US government created this program. It's a directed parole program so that individuals will come through this pathway. And when the program launched last Monday, that was when they put in effect basically that people would not be able to come across the US southern border any longer via Mexico. I think yeah. And I think, so that's ultimately the plan, is that this directed parole program will serve as the entry point. And that's really where everyone should kind of direct themselves if that's the way they're going to come in. Kids. So yes, so they're right now, in order to come in, the kids need to be a part of the family on the application. We are still trying to figure out, I think, what the US government will do in regards to any unaccompanied minors from Ukraine that may need support here in the US. But for now, the program is really set up for families that are intact and that would be coming together and be sponsored here in the US.
So another question we got was whether the Ukrainians are going to be receiving the same, and the questioner says welcome money that Afghans are receiving from the US via the resettlement agencies. So unfortunately, the answer is no. That's sort of how we describe, the difference between what the Ukrainian refugees are receiving through this parole program, the humanitarian parole program, and what would be either the refugee resettlement system or something like the State Department did in terms of creating an Afghan parole program that mirrored the services and the cash assistance that other refugees would receive. Two other questions, maybe Megan, I can ask them to you, but obviously Olga, especially on the second question, would love, if you could add any texture. So first question is, do you think USCIS will be overwhelmed by applications for sponsorship and housing? Do you think there will be more sponsorships houses than Ukrainian refugees? And then the second question is, what is the cost for sponsors? Because obviously I think it is unclear. Is there a minimum amount of income or expected amounts of support?
Yeah, I can tell you that we know that within the first 48 hours of the Uniting for Ukraine portal, when it opened, there were over 4,000 applications, which I think is pretty amazing. I think we know just from our work at LARS that we have so many people with big hearts who want to help out and want to support. So I do imagine that there will be a lot of people who come forth and who would love to host a family. I think that's what keeps me in this work, is just to see the heart of the American people really engaging in this way. Cost, it's a tricky one. I think there's partly why there's no, this is how much it costs on a website somewhere. Ultimately, I think the vetting process related to financial support is looking at your own financials to see that you have enough in the bank to be able to support additional people that put you above the poverty line. So those are the types of criteria that the US government will utilize when sort of judging those applications. But what it actually costs, it's really hard to say. I think without any sort of medical insurance or limited insurance, no access to cash assistance or food stamps for adults, those types of things that we usually rely upon, which frankly are really the minimum. They're not like lots of money for families. It's going to be, there's going to be costs that people will incur. And again, I think some people, will be able to house people in their own homes, so it'll really vary based on who, the dynamics of the case. But I think it's important to just think through that responsibility and make sure you're just ready to cover those costs, whatever they may be. And I don't know, Olga, would you like to add any more to that, or what you're seeing on the ground?
Good. Well, I agree with each word that you said. Yes, that mostly that if the sponsor is filing the documents for the person that he wants to bring, he is responsible for the financial support, for any for the any needs that he's, because there is even in the question in that form, are you going to provide the financial support? And you do reply yes, and that's how the people would be allowed to come to United States. Of course, we do have the churches that are going to help. We're already collecting donations like furnitures, that we are going to put, because even today we received the email from our volunteer coordinator, and she said there is a lot of people who wants to donate the furniture. So we are collecting the donations, and we will be helping from our side as much as we can too.
Okay, wonderful. Now I had a couple questions for Chelsea. So Chelsea, you mentioned that there would be more information relating to advocate for congressional action. So obviously, I think the question is kind of how can people stay informed? And then how can you order the Stand Up, Speak Up kit?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for those questions. So LIRS has a pretty extensive Ukraine Crisis Action Hub, which you can find at lirs.org/Ukraine, which outlines the adapt pieces step by step in bite-sized ways so that you can learn more about advocacy if that's of interest to you or your community. You can see some of the beautiful impact stories that we've been hearing about how offices like Olga's are already making a difference in the lives of our arriving Ukrainian neighbors. So the Ukraine Action Hub, lirs.org/Ukraine, is a great place to sort of stay abreast of some of the changes. We're updating that frequently. And then in terms of the Stand Up, Speak Up kit, you can download the kit for free at lirs.org/speakup. And all of these links will be included in the follow-up email. So if you're not able to write them down quickly now, keep an eye out for that follow-up email, and all of them will be there. But thank you for those questions. I love that so many of you are already thinking about how do you take this information and begin taking action. So thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So Olga, a question for you is, where will refugees be moving? And then a question for Megan. When I read the application form, it was required to name the individuals that you want to sponsor. How do we connect with individuals needing sponsorship?
Was the question where or when?
Where?
Where? Okay. Well, if those that do through the United program, right, the sponsor is responsible to take to their houses or to find them their apartment and pay for their rent. Those that are coming as a regular refugees, usually we are the one who is responsible to find the rent, and because they will get the assistance money for the to pay for the rent.
Great, thanks, Olga. And then to address the question of how to be matched, I guess, with somebody who's interested or to sponsor, a lot of that instruction, and I'll just direct you to the USCIS website where there sort of answers those questions, and you can kind of go through that process to get connected to a family who's interested in coming through there. Unfortunately, we are not able to do the matching piece, but you can get all that information on that site.
Okay, and then a couple other questions are maybe for Megan. Will sponsors through the Uniting for Ukraine program have reporting obligations? And then does LIRS or other national organizations offer a matching program to facilitate U.S. who want to serve as financial sponsors?
Yeah, great questions. So, it's a good question around sort of the reporting piece. I believe, by signing that form, you are attesting to your ability and your responsibility to financially support the family. I'm not sure as to how that follow-up is conducted by the US government, but I think, ultimately there is some requirements there that, they are going to make sure that the form is followed up on, that the family is taken care of. Of course, we have our concerns too about, what happens if a sponsorship breaks down or something doesn't work out. And I think that's in part, where we hope to be the safety net for those types of situations that, could happen. And so we can provide some additional financial support, or we can provide, some staff that could step in if need be. So that's our hope, and we see that as our role. And again, as far as the matching is concerned, I think just, again, I would refer you back to that USCIS website where they're able to share all of the information on how to be matched.
Wonderful. And then a question for either Olga or Megan is, healthcare can obviously be a huge expense for sponsors. A note about how with an Afghan child who broke his arm, the expense would have broken the organization if they had to pay for the care. Will Ukrainians under the Uniting for Ukraine be eligible for Medicaid? And then a question for Chelsea: we are a congregation in central Nebraska. How can we help? And then does LIRS also help refugees in Eastern Europe? So I can answer that last question on, at the moment, LIRS's footprint is domestically focused. We are excited to be anticipating, have presented to our board an international expansion. It isn't to Ukraine yet. We did discuss whether it made sense for us, especially given our expertise when it comes to children, to play a role there. We're still sorting out whether that would make sense, but really our focus at the moment, given the commitment by the president to welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees here, is focused domestically. But Megan and Chelsea, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I would say, just generally speaking, people under humanitarian parole aren't eligible for Medicaid. However, there are some states who have exceptions. Olga, I believe Massachusetts is one of those where there is some parts of Medicaid that they can access. Is that true?
Yes, all of the people that came through the Mexican border with the humanitarian parole, all of them received the Mezcal. Adults received limited insurance. Those that are pregnant received the best insurance, and kids also receive standard insurance, which is the best insurance that you get in the state.
That's great. Yes. And that's actually a good point. So it's generally, like, federally, adults, no. Pregnant women or new mothers, yes. And then children can also access it. So that's good. And we want to, make sure that anything anyone's eligible for, they're able to get. And certainly medical, that's going to be expensive. They're also eligible for the Affordable Care Act plans. And so that's another place in some states where there might not be expanded opportunities to access Medicaid. That might be another place where they could access some form of care, of course, at a cost. Over to you,
and then,
Chelsea.
are there any criteria to be sponsors? And then Chelsea, obviously wants you to get to that question of, can a congregation help?
Yeah, so for criteria, all of the vetting that's being conducted on sponsors is also being done through USCIS, Department of Homeland Security processes. We don't know the intricacies, of how that happens. But generally speaking, I expect that it would be rigorous and that they will be looking closely at sponsors and identifying and ensuring that they're making safe placements with those who are being sponsored.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Yeah, and in terms of how congregations can be a part of this, Megan has shared some information on the Uniting for Ukraine sponsorship program. But I think that as congregations, faith communities, and other groups are discerning whether this is an opportunity they want to pursue or how they might be called to engage in this work of welcoming our immigrant and refugee neighbors, a really great place to start is the LIRS Emmaus Congregational Discernment Guide, which kind of digs into the work of LIRS, some of the terminology that you've been hearing on this call and that is common in this work, to sort of provide a foundation for congregations to understand a little bit of the system and then take an action step. So I think that's a great place to start. And then the beautiful thing about LIRS's Stand Up Speak Up program and some of our other opportunities is that they are available for folks across the country. So we see congregations in Alaska engaging in this work. We see congregations all over the place. As a fellow Nebraskan, I'm happy to connect, but I do believe that regardless of where a congregation is, you can pursue options like sponsorship through Uniting for Ukraine or engaging in some of the ministries and other programmatic work of LIRS. And we'll be sure that all of these congregational resources are included in follow-up as well.
Okay, wonderful. I know there was also a question about, are the refugees vetted?
Oh, yes, of course. Refugees, generally it takes anywhere from, 2 to 5 to sometimes 10 years for a refugee to get through the U.S. refugee admissions program, and the vetting is very extensive. I think refugees, there's been studies that shown refugees are some of the most vetted people that are in the United States, and so they absolutely are.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, and then the last question I will take is one about how is responding to Ukrainian refugees affecting the ability of LIRS and other agencies to help refugees from other places. And obviously, Olga would welcome your perspective as well from Accentria's vantage point. Our view is that I think it reflects the weaknesses and strengths of the system. It reflects the weaknesses in the sense that Ukrainian refugees should have been admitted through the refugee program. And unfortunately, we have seen in the last year 2 crises where we have created systems, meaning use the humanitarian parole system because the traditional refugee resettlement system is not as nimble or flexible as it needs to be. And so that's where, from a big picture perspective, our point is that we shouldn't view these as at odds with one another, but actually highlighting the work we still have ahead to rebuild the resettlement infrastructure, and not just returning to the way it was, but frankly, to a better system. The fact that it takes 5 years on average for a refugee to be resettled highlights the fact that if you are fleeing war, violence, persecution, a 5-year average time period means that the refugee resettlement system is not the appropriate response for you to seek refuge and protection. And I think it also, so kind of from a policy perspective, we have an opportunity to try to reimagine and implement a better system. And then I think from a programmatic perspective, when Megan described the welcome centers, we realized that at the core of our work, regardless of the legal classification you're entering in, whether you are an asylee or a refugee, or you're characterized technically by the government bureaucracy as a humanitarian parolee, you are a person, right? You're part of a family, you are a child who is unaccompanied, or you're an individual. And so the Welcome Center, the theory behind it is that regardless of your legal status, that you're receiving the same types of you're receiving the same types of social services in that immediate term, and in the medium and long term, you will need the same types of things in terms of employment services or referrals to a lawyer, et cetera. And so we've created these one-stop shops of welcome centers because we believe that it is a better way instead of creating these redundant systems. So our hope is that, thanks to private funding, thanks to individual donors, we are able to show a new model of immigration services. And that is how we will help with Ukrainian refugees. But the hope is that it'll actually build a better system for, immigrants across the board. And so we approach the Ukrainian refugees as a way to build a better system, to solve bigger problems that are not unique to Ukrainian refugees. And our hope is that it will allow us kind of a new way of meeting the needs of our clients. So I'll just end by saying, really, thank you so much. Wonderful questions. Thank you all for being so incredibly engaged. And then most of all, thank you for your compassion. What I think I could see certainly in the chat box as a clear commitment to the work of welcome. So as others on the panel mentioned, we will be sending a follow-up email with all of the resources we've discussed today. So please stay tuned. In the meantime, feel free to visit lirs.org/Ukraine for more information. And please, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at LIRS.org. because we will continue to keep you updated, send out the latest action alerts and any indications of how you can directly get involved. But really, thank you for your partnership in this work of welcome.